Hello everyone, it's Scott and we're back for day 7 of Bloomburrow spoiler season. We got less cards than we have over the last few days, but I think they're going to be impactful cards when it comes to standard. But before we dive into them, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Bloomburrow spoiler season and beyond. And I'll be doing some top 10 videos later this week, so you want to stick around for those to see what I think are going to be the most impactful cards for standard from the set. Alright, let's dive into today's previews. So first we've got Storm Chaser's Talent for a blue mana. You get an enchantment, that's a class, and when Storm Chaser's Talent enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 blue and red Otter creature token with prowess, and you can level it up to level 2 for 3 and a blue mana, and when this class becomes level 2, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So potentially an impactful ability there. And on level 3, you pay 5 and a blue mana, and when you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to create an additional 1/1 blue and red Otter creature token with prowess every time you do that. So I think when we look at Storm Chaser's Talent, what we have to look at it through is the lens of level 1, where for 1 mana you're getting a 1/1 blue and red Otter creature token with prowess. For 1 mana, that's reasonable. And then everything else I think is, hey, in the mid to late game, if I've got extra mana lying around, then I can go ahead and activate one of these additional abilities. And if I get into an incredibly long game, I can activate level 3, and then I can rebuild the battlefield if the opponent has board wipe me or something like that. So I think this is definitely going to go into our Is It Prowess deck. Is it 4 copies immediately? I'm not sure on that, but it's definitely going to be a couple of copies in the Is It Prowess deck that we're going to see during Bloomburrow standard season. Next, we've got Essence Chandler for 1 and a white mana. You get a Bat Cleric. That's a 2/1. And as long as you've lost life this turn, Essence Chandler has flying and vigilance. And whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Essence Chandler. And when Essence Chandler dies, put its counters on target creature you control. So I think this is a very solid bat, and we've seen cards like this in Standard have some playability. And we've got already a life gain deck in Standard that's built around Amalia. Now, obviously, Amalia is not a bat, but I think Amalia could fit into this kind of black-white bird bat deck that will probably be part of Standard. And we already have from Bloomburrow a bat that every time you cast a creature spell and it hits the battlefield, you gain a life. So every time you cast a creature spell, you'd be, in essence, increasing Essence Chandler's power and toughness by 1 and 1. And because of that, I think this is going to be a core part of that deck as we move into Bloomburrow standard season. Next, we've got Cruelcraw's Heist for 2 black mana. You get a sorcery with gift a card, and you may promise an opponent a gift as you cast the spell. If you do, they draw a card before its other effects, and target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it, exile that card, which is important, because if it just goes to the graveyard, then that's something that they could potentially get back if they had some graveyard shenanigans. But when it goes to exile, that means your opponent can't get access to that card anymore. And if the gift was promised, you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. So I really like Cruelcraw's Heist. It reminds me a little bit of Thoughtseize, but Thoughtseize is a mana cheaper, but with Thoughtseize you don't get to play the card that you're exiling, and I think for that extra mana, that ability to play the card that you're forcing your opponent to get rid of at some point, I think is powerful, because a lot of times you're going to get rid of whatever the best card is in their hand at that point, and then in the late game you can go ahead and cast that and put that creature or spell into use on your side. And I think that's what's going to make this standard playable. Next, we've got Caretaker's Talent for 2 and a white mana. You get an enchantment, that's a class on level 1. Whenever one or more tokens you control enter the battlefield, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So nice enter the battlefield trigger there. A nice enter the battlefield ability there when you have a token enter the battlefield, then you go ahead and get a card as a result of that. So just by playing the game with this in play, in a tokens deck, you're going to be drawing a lot of additional cards. And I think that's, for 3 mana, that's probably good enough to see standard play. But then you can also level it up by paying 1 mana to level 2. And when this class becomes level 2, create a token. That's a copy of target token you control. So whatever your best token is, you can make now a copy of that. And for 3 and a white mana, you can move it to level 3, and tokens you control get +2/+2 if they're creatures. So I think, again, on level 1, that's where we want to evaluate this, and everything else is gravy from there. So I think on level 1, if you are in a tokens matter deck, and again, it's any kind of tokens, it could be creature tokens, it could be clue tokens, or whatever you've got as part of your base game plan, the ability to just keep getting a card every time that you have one of those tokens enter the battlefield is a pretty powerful ability. And over the course of the game, for 3 mana, you might be able to draw 4 or 5 or more additional cards, and I think that's good enough to see standard play. We'll just have to kind of see where our token deck goes in standard to see how many copies that deck might want. Next, we've got Scrap Shooter for 1 and 2 green mana. You get a Raccoon Archer. That's a 4/4, and it has Gift a Card, and it also has Reach. And when Scrap Shooter enters, if the gift was promised, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. So this is definitely going to be standard playable as a sideboard card. We're already playing Tranquil Frillback in green decks to give this ability, but it costs 1 green mana for every time you activate that. Here, all you have to do is give your opponent a card, and you get to destroy an enchantment or a creature. So I think this is definitely a sideboard card in those green decks, and I'm not 100% it's better than Tranquil Frillback, but it's pretty close. Next, we've got Azor Beastbinder for 1 and a blue mana. You get a 1/3 Rat Rogue with Vigilance. And Azor Beastbinder can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or greater. And whenever Azor Beastbinder attacks, up to 1 target artifact, creature, or planeswalker an opponent controls loses all abilities until your next turn. If it's a creature, it has base power and toughness of 2 and 2 until end of your next turn. So this is definitely going to see standard play, because basically the ability to turn off a Sheoldred. Because what this does is it turns off Sheoldred, makes it a 2/2, and because of that ability to just turn off the best thing your opponent has on the board, and that could be an artifact, a planeswalker, or a creature, I think makes this standard playable. Now, is this going to be a 4-of index? I don't know. But we know from previous sets, we've got a lot of rats running around, and if we do end up with a rat deck, I think this will be a key part of that deck. Next, we've got some lower rarity cards that I think are going to have standard playability. So the first is Sonar Strike for 1 and a white mana. You get an instant, and Sonar Strike deals 4 damage to target attacking, blocking, or tapped creature. You gain 3 life if you control a bat. So bat decks easily are going to want to include this in their deck, because you're going to get that effect of gaining life, and there are a lot of bat cards that just by gaining life, good things happen for you. And for 2 mana, it's a very reasonable cost to remove an attacking, blocking, or tapped creature from the battlefield. So I think this will see definite standard play, and definitely if you see this in limited, it's a card you want to be playing. Next, we've got Eddie Merc Crab for 5 and 2 blue mana. You get an Elemental Crab. That's a 5/5 with Flash. And this spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. Eddie Merc Crab enters tapped if it's not your turn. Eddie Merc Crab enters tapped if it's not your turn, and when Eddie Merc Crab enters the battlefield, tap up to 2 target creatures. So this is very similar to Tolarian Terror that sees a lot of play in mono blue decks and standard. So I think this is another card that I think almost immediately just falls right into that deck. And you'll be able to get this down to 2 mana relatively quickly in that game plan. You're playing your Hot Gen and your Tolarian Terror, and now you can add 4 copies of this to give you 12 creatures that can attack and hopefully help win you that game. So I think mono blue tempo or control, I think this is a great card for that. Next, we've got Spell Geyser for 2 and 2 blue mana. You get an instant, and you get to choose one, either counter target spell or surveil 2, then draw 2 cards. A limited playable card. I don't think you'll see any standard play at all. Next, we've got a Gateblade Assassin for 1 and a black mana. You get a 1/3 that's a Lizard Assassin, and whenever a Gateblade Assassin attacks, defending player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So this is another one of those. We've got multiple lizards now that we've seen from the set that anytime they attack, they cause the opponent to lose life. But the upside of this card, even though it's a common, is that you get to gain life as well. And because of that, I think, even though this is a common, I think it's got some standard playability if we do indeed see a Lizards deck or some kind of probably black-red deck that is centered around dealing damage just for playing the game to your opponent. And we've seen cards like Furnace Punisher have a significant impact at times in standard. So I think this has got some standard playability because of that ability. Next, we've got Psychic Whirl for 2 and a black mana. You get a sorcery, and target opponent discards 2 cards. Then if you control a rat, you get to surveil 2. So this is a callback to what we've seen in the past with Go Blank, where your opponent has forced to discard a couple of cards. So I think this has some potential standard playability in the right kind of deck where you're really trying to force your opponent to discard cards to get them down to they're basically having to top deck everything. And if that's the case, then I think this has got some standard playability. But outside of that, I don't think we're going to see much of it. Next, we've got Flame Cash Gecko for 1 and a red mana. You get a Lizard Warlock. That's a 2/2. And when Flame Cash Gecko enters, if an opponent lost life this turn, you get to add black and red mana to your mana pool. And then for 1 and a red mana, you can discard a card and then draw a card. So this is a card that I think goes right into our Lizard deck that is in Rakdos colors in standard, because we've already got a number of lizards. We just talked about one. Where simply by attacking, you're forcing your opponent to lose life. So you play this during your second main phase, and then you're getting the added bonus of 2 additional mana. So you can chain things together and cast more spells on a given turn. And that's good enough to see play in standard. Next, we've got Raccoon Railer. For 1 and a red mana, you get a Raccoon Bard. That's a 2/2. And you can tap it, and target creature you control gains haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So again, Raccoon Railer, probably not going to see much standard play, but it is a good card in limited, because in the late game when you're actually casting your high cost cards, then you can give them haste if you have Raccoon Railer on the battlefield. All right, so we've got a couple of interesting cards here that I think are going to definitely see some standard play. The first is Rabid Gnaw for 1 and a red mana. You get an instant, and target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So in green, we've seen this is Rabid Bite in green, with a little bit of upside of giving your creature that +1/+0. So I know that card has seen play over the years in standard. So I think the fact that this is not at sorcery speed, it's at instant speed, I really do think that makes it playable in the right deck in standard, because you want to be able to deal with your opponent's most difficult creatures to deal with on their turn, and with this instant it's going to allow you to do that. And if you've got prowess creatures and you've been able to buff them up a little bit, then you can even do more damage to that one creature and hopefully knock it off the board and be able to go ahead and attack in and get that final bit of damage in. Next, we've got Wildfire Howl for 1 and 2 red mana. You get a sorcery with gift a card. You get a sorcery with gift a card. And Wildfire Howl deals 2 damage to each creature. If the gift was promised, instead, Wildfire Howl deals 1 damage to any target and 2 damage to each creature. So we've got similar spells to this already in Standard that see some marginal play. I mean, we've got Brotherhood's End that does 3 damage to everything. So I think in the short run, we don't see this played very much. But I think if we get to a year from now, we're going into rotation where the Brothers' War is rotating out, then I think we can see Wildfire Howl see some Standard play, because it's going to do something that you want, which is get that damage into all your opponent's creatures, and hopefully the benefit of that is significant enough for you to win the game. Our last card of the day is Stocking the Pantry for a green mana. You get an enchantment, and whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, put a stock counter on Stocking the Pantry. And then for 2, you can remove a supply counter from Stocking the Pantry and draw a card. So I think this is an easy include in any deck in Standard that you're already using green in. And what you're going to do throughout the course of the game is give things +1/+1 counters. So if there's a deck that's doing that, this is going to be an easy include in that, because the upside of this is that, hey, every 2 times you do this, you can draw an additional card. So rather than leaving some mana on the table, you can go ahead and use that to draw additional cards just for doing the things that you want to do. And these are the kinds of cards that tend to be successful in Standard, where you're just playing the game and good things happen because you're playing the game. All right, that's our spoilers for day 7. We've got a little bit less than 20 cards still to see from the set. So I assume in the next 24 hours or so, we'll get those cards. We'll have one more preview video. And then starting Friday, I will do top 10 lists, and I'll start with our top 10 mythic rares from the set, and we'll go from there. So thanks for staying to the end of the video. And I've left links to yesterday's video and to all of our Bloomburrow videos, and a subscribe button so you can subscribe as well to get further content like this throughout Bloomburrow spoiler season and beyond. Thanks. I'll see you next time.